Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about something that people have been talking about a lot this week. It is a topic that is often misunderstood and misrepresented. It's going to be the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the ongoing tension. There has been an escalation this past week, and we are going to try and devise the whys and the hows of it. But first, I want to talk about the history, a little bit of why is there a problem in the first place. I think that people like to pretend that this is a very complex, incredibly intricate, delicate issue, when in reality it isn't. And to illustrate that point, let's do a thought experiment. This is one, I may have even done this on the podcast before, but let's for a second pretend that we have a magic wand, and we wave that magic wand around, and it grants us whatever wishes we want. And we hand that magic wand to Israel. And we say, Israel, whatever you want, just wave the wand. And they wave the wand, and what happens? There is peace in the Middle East tomorrow. Israel's right to exist is recognized, and they are left alone. Now, on the flip side, if we hand that to the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, and we say, Hamas, wave your magic wand. What do you want? Israel does not exist anymore. It is removed from the face of the earth, and all the Jews are dead. And it's that simple. That is the difference between Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. It is one wants to be left alone and would have peace tomorrow if it was offered, and the other wants to kill all the Jews. Now, here's a little bit of history for you, just brief history. Israel was founded in 1947 by the British mandate and the world. Basically, the Britons controlled a large swath of the Middle East after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and Israel was formed in response to World War II when 6 million Jews were killed by Nazi Germany. So the Jews decided that they needed a place. There was a place in the Middle East. It was not usurped land from Palestinian people. There has never been a Palestinian state. And the Palestinians didn't start calling themselves Palestinians until after the founding of Israel. There has been a continuous Jewish presence in the Middle East since before Islam was a religion. The Jews were there first. That's as simple as it gets. And so 1947, the country of Israel is created and founded out of people who are already there. Again, they didn't pack up and move. They were already there. In 1948, when the country was 1 day old, they were attacked by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. They tried to destroy the newly formed country, wipe it off the face of the earth. Israel won that war and continued to exist for another 20 years until they were attacked again when Egypt and Syria and Jordan and Syria and Iraq all attempted to destroy Israel again in 1967. The Israeli army launched a massive attack and destroyed all of the forces surrounding them and took control of what is now known as the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Sinai Peninsula. Now, to demonstrate that Israel is willing to accept peace in the Middle East if offered, in 1978, Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula, which is a spot that is actually larger than the rest of the country that is now Israel, and oil rich. They gave this land back to Egypt in exchange for peace. Egypt was willing to sign a peace deal, got the Sinai Peninsula back, and Israel was more than happy to give them back that land in exchange for peace. Israel has also agreed to give Palestine its own state on multiple occasions. In 2000, Israel agreed to give the Palestinians 95% of the West Bank and all of the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinians refused that offer, much to the shock and dismay of the U.S., who tried to negotiate those peace deals. And they made that same deal to the current leadership in Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, in 2008. They were going to give them 95% of the West Bank and Gaza to form a country of Palestine. And again, that offer was refused. In 2005, Israel unilaterally left the Gaza Strip. Israel does not control the Gaza Strip. They do not govern the Gaza Strip. There are not troops in Gaza. Gaza is completely governed by the Palestinian Authority, and it has been for 15 or 16 years at this point. There is no control. That is it. Basically, Gaza is its own country at this time, controlled by the Palestinian Authority, who now use it as a launching base to launch rockets into Israel. So that is where we sit right now. The Palestinian Authority is an actual terrorist organization. So is Hamas. The current conflict this week was brought about because the Palestinian Authority was supposed to have an election in Gaza to determine the leadership of the Palestinian people, and they canceled it yet again. I believe Mahmoud Abbas is in his 15th year as leader for a term that was supposed to last 4. So he's not big on the whole election thing. But they were going to have one, and then when it became clear that Hamas, a terrorist organization that is worse than the Palestinian Authority, was probably going to win, he canceled the elections and cited a case as the reason for it. He said Israeli aggression was the reason. And what did he use as proof of Israeli aggression? The eviction of 6 Palestinians from their homes. That's it. That's the Israeli aggression. There was an ongoing legal battle in Israel that the Supreme Court finally ruled on. It's been a 50-year-long legal battle when Jews had to abandon part of the West Bank. When Jews had to abandon part of the West Bank, they left houses there. Palestinians moved into those houses. And then when Israel retook control of that area, there was an ongoing legal battle because the Jews who lived in those houses wanted them back. And there's been a legal battle for the last 50 years about these properties, this neighborhood, basically. And the Supreme Court finally ruled in Israel. The Supreme Court is both Jewish and Muslim, and they ruled that the Jewish people could have their houses back. Basically, the Palestinians have been living rent-free in these houses for 50 years, is what it comes down to. And they were finally told, hey, you got to pay or move. And they elected to move, and the Palestinian Authority is using that as a basis to launch a bunch of riots within the country. Now, this whole thing is very complicated. That legal case is very complicated. It's got a lot of ins and outs. The riots and why they took place are very complicated. But here's what's not complicated. Hamas launched thousands of rockets into Israel indiscriminately to kill men, women, children, animals, and other Arabs who happen to live in Israel. Israel is either 10 or 20% Arab as it is, and they enjoy all the same equal rights as their Israeli or as their Jewish brothers who live there as well. There are, by way of just a fun fact, there are 0 Jews who live in Gaza, for example, because they would be murdered, but Israel has a 10 to 20% Arab population. So Hamas launches thousands of rockets indiscriminately to kill Jews within Israel. That's not complicated. That provocation comes from a terrorist organization that will use fear to terrorize people. Imagine having thousands of rockets launched into your country. It's terrifying. Now, Israel luckily has this very advanced system for intercepting rockets called the Iron Dome. But the Iron Dome is only 90% effective. So let's imagine that you launch 1,000 rockets into Israel. Well, that Iron Dome, we've seen the pictures, we've seen the videos. It's very cool. It shoots down the rockets in the air, but it's only getting 90% of them. So if you launch 1,000 rockets, 100 rockets still hit the ground in Israel. And there have been some Israelis who have been killed and a few hundred who have been wounded by these attacks. So Israel responds, as any country would, by shooting rockets into Gaza. Now, here's the difference. Hamas fires indiscriminately to kill whoever they want and whoever they can. They do not care. Israel, by contrast, is so incredibly restrained and moral. They go out of their way to minimize collateral damage, to minimize casualties of civilians in a way that I don't think any army ever has or ever will, because they know that Hamas is trying to trick the Western media into believing that Israel is the bad guy. And it works. You see the framing of it on the left in the United States. Go read your opinion pieces that are coming out this week about the big bad Jews and how they're bullying small old Gaza or the Palestinian people. You'll see them talk about it being an apartheid state. You'll see them talk about the Jews with the jackboot of tyranny upon the Palestinians. This framing is absurd. It's nonsensical. It's ahistorical, and it's immoral. Because again, go back to our thought experiment. Jews just want to be left in peace. Israel wants to be left in peace. They do not want to fight the Palestinians. They are more than willing to give them their own country. Hamas, by contrast, in their founding charter, calls for the destruction of Israel and the genocide of all Jews. So let's not take their side. Israel, when they respond to these attacks, they use something called a knock bomb. So earlier this week, there was a big outcry because Israel knocked down an apartment building. And you saw all these videos of Palestinians taking video of the building as it's being bombed. Now, how did all those people know that that building was going to be bombed? Well, because the Israeli Defense Force told them it was going to be bombed. They use something called a knock bomb. So Israel will launch a bomb at a target, and it hits the top of the building and causes the building to shake so that it warns people to evacuate the building. They then wait a half hour and they bomb it again. They also called the building's security to tell him, we are going to bomb this target, evacuate everyone from the building. They didn't do it in this case, but in the past, they've even dropped pamphlets on the target to let people know, we are going to come for this building, you should get out. They go out of their way to minimize the casualties that they are causing to women and children. Now, there is no moral equivalence here. There is none whatsoever. Israel is catching flack for the past couple days for a couple things that they've done. They basically tricked the Western media into doing a lot of their work for them. They said that they were coming in, they were going to go and use ground forces inside Gaza. And so Hamas, this terrorist organization in Gaza, loaded up a bunch of their fighters in the tunnels. Hamas has dug tunnels into Israel to kidnap and kill Jews. So they got all their fighters in the tunnels in the preparation for the Israeli Defense Force to come in through the tunnels to fight the terrorists. But Israel seems just tricked the Western media into getting Hamas to go into the tunnels and then bombed all the tunnels and killed a whole bunch of terrorists, which is fantastic. Because, again, that minimizes civilian casualties. Anyone in that tunnel, they're not a civilian. They are a terrorist because those tunnels are built for terror. They are not built for safety. Then they got into some hot water today for bombing the Associated Press and the Al Jazeera building. And everyone is talking about journalists need to be safe. They did the same thing, by the way. They evacuated the building. They made sure it was empty. But everyone says, well, they're just doing this because of the criticism. There is a video of an Al Jazeera reporter on air saying, oh my gosh, they're firing missiles from underneath our building. This is crazy. That video, it exists. They didn't bomb it because it's a newspaper or a TV station. They bombed it because this is what Hamas does. Hamas makes their targets in civilian buildings. They fire out of apartments. They fire out of hospitals. They build their headquarters in the basement of a school. They use a television station as cover because they know when Israel is forced to strike back, to strike at Hamas, the Western media is going to jump on Israel as blowing up a hospital or a church or a mosque or a school. And everyone's going to say, how could they do this? Because Hamas is manipulating you. There were rockets being shot out of the bottom of the building of the Associated Press. And everyone's talking about the journalists need to be safe. Israel needs to be safe. How about this? Don't share office space with terrorists. That seems like a good rule we should all follow. It's just ridiculous. You've watched the left in this country. you can tell how serious a person is, how seriously they've studied history, the way they talk about Israel and Palestine. We want peace in the Middle East. We want the Palestinians to be healthy and happy. We want Israel to be healthy and happy. But we can't pretend that it's a 50-50 problem. It's not a 50-50 problem. This is an 80-20 problem. This is a 90-10 problem. 90% of the problem we have at this point is the result of the Palestinian leadership. It is a result of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas they're not looking out for the people and instead using the funding from countries like Iran to make Israel look bad at the expense of people. The fact that Gaza is not a nice place to live is not the result of Israel. They have had what amounts to billions and billions of dollars of aid. And the Palestinian Authority doesn't use that to build schools or build new mosques or update the sewage system or get food to people who are starving. They use it to build rockets and shoot bombs at Israel and build tunnels to send fighters in across the Israeli border to kidnap Jews and kill them. It's not a moral equivalence here that any serious person can make. And you see it constantly from people on the left. And this problem, I don't care if you loved him or you hated him. And I don't think that he was the person who understood this. But the Trump administration did a good job in the Middle East. It was the place where their policies actually shine the brightest. The peace deals that were made in the Middle East between Israel and Saudi Arabia, Israel and Yemen, all these countries, there was talk of Israel and Morocco making peace. All of this has been burned down. And we're 5 months in to this new administration. Joe Biden shipped over $200 million to the Palestinian Authority. We stopped funding the Palestinian Authority. We stopped sending aid money to Palestine, to the Palestinian Authority. Why did we do that? Because they have a program. If I strap a suicide vest on myself and I go and blow up a bus full of Israelis, if I commit martyrdom and my family lives in Palestine, the Palestinian Authority will pay my family. They pay the family of dead terrorists so that you can't use that as an excuse as to why you can't martyr yourself. Oh, I'm concerned. How will my parents feed themselves? How will my wife or my cousins live without me to bring home money? The Palestinian Authority will pay for you to be a martyr. And we said, we don't think American tax dollars should go fund actual terrorists. Joe Biden said, no, we don't need to worry about that. Come on, guys. Joe Biden doesn't need to worry about the Palestinian Authority paying for martyrdom with American tax dollars. Come on, man. It's ridiculous. It's insane. This is Joe Biden's fault. Everyone knew that Donald Trump stood by Israel. He did what no American president would do, despite the fact that every American president promised to do it. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, which was one of the best things he did in his presidency. It's one of the top 5 to me, because Israel is our ally in the Middle East. Every other country we might work with a little bit, but they're not our allies necessarily. Saudi Arabia is not our ally. They are ideologically opposed to Western values. But Israel is not. Israel is a westernized country in the Middle East. It's the most democratic place, and even the Arabs in Israel live better than anywhere else in the Middle East. They're more free than anywhere in the Middle East, and they live in a Jewish state. Saying that we support Israel and being full-throated about it made it clear that to attack Israel was to attack the United States. Joe Biden can't even come out and say whether or not they're going to replenish the Iron Dome. That's insane. To leave Israel defenseless to these rocket attacks, it's shameful. It bothers me that this administration has bungled this so badly. This should be an easy one. Israel is our partner and our ally in the Middle East. We should support them because, again, I've said it twice in this podcast. There is no moral equivalence here. Israel is probably the most moral army on the planet. They go farther than anyone else to avoid casualties that are unnecessary, to avoid that collateral damage. Could you imagine if Mexico launched 10 rockets into Texas? Not 1,000, not 2,000, but if they launched 10 into Texas, Mexico would be South Texas in 5 minutes. And we would not hesitate. We got the 2 towers got hit by airplanes on 9/11 in 2001 in the United States. And we invaded Iraq and decimated the 5th largest army in the world in less than 2 weeks. It took us to wipe out the 5th, I think it was the 5th largest army in the world. Beat them in 2 weeks. We were in that country for a very long time, but the army got beat in 2 weeks. Now, there was 2,000 people in a country of 350 million people who were killed. And as we should have chased down every person responsible and killed them for that horrific attack. I do not expect Israel to do anything that the United States wouldn't do, or any country on the world wouldn't do. You have a right to defend yourself. That's what this is. It's a defensive war. They just want to be left alone. They didn't launch rockets. They didn't go and attack Palestine. But when Hamas attacks you, you have a right to fight back. You have a moral obligation to fight back, to protect your people. So let's support Israel, people. This is one that is not difficult. It is not hard to see through all the nonsense. The media does a very bad job of framing this argument to make it seem like because the Jewish army is powerful and the Jewish state is rich, that the Palestinians are the oppressed and Israel is the oppressor. It is not true. Anyway, we're going to leave it there today. People, I want to thank you for continuing to tune in. We've been doing a good job with the numbers on this show, and I appreciate everyone who shares this podcast. Sharing the episodes is tremendous. It helps a lot. The Facebook, we have new Facebook videos. So it used to be links to YouTube we'd put up on Facebook, but Facebook kind of squashes the numbers that those videos do. It's better to upload your stuff directly to Facebook. So we have videos on Facebook and YouTube. We've got the Apple Podcast, the Spotify Podcast. We got it everywhere you want to be. You can actually download this directly from my website, tylerchrestman.org, and just listen to it on your own. I don't know why you would do it that way. There are much easier ways to do it, but you could do it. I just want to thank everyone who supports the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Make sure that you guys are liking, subscribe, comment on it. Whenever you comment on the YouTube videos or the Facebook stuff, it allows for more organic reach. So comments are always appreciated. And questions. I love questions. You give me questions. I have a section here on my little, I don't have a script necessarily, but on the place I make little notes in case there's some stuff I want to remember to talk about. I have a spot here specifically for questions to answer at the end of episodes. I always love questions. Sometimes I forget and I answer them in writing, and I should do them on the show more often. But anyway, we're going to leave it there. I am Tyler Chrestman. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I will catch you next episode.